Entrepreneurially Thinking is a presentation of BioSTL and CET, Center for Emerging Technologies, with Rare Gem Productions, changing the way you view new ventures, including you on the pathway to success with your business in the St. Louis marketplace and beyond. Here's your hosts, Cheryl and Christy. Now let's get thinking entrepreneurially.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. Our goal is to exemplify your entrepreneurial mindset and create pathways for business success in the St. Louis marketplace and beyond. I'm Christy-Maxfield.
And I want to exemplify that I'm Dr. Cheryl-Watkins-Moore with the Bioscience Inclusion Initiative for our wonderful region. Hey, Christy girl.
Hello, my exemplary friend. How are you today?
Oh, I love our adjectives and everything. They're just wonderful.
Jade makes sure we have good language to express ourselves with.
Yes.
And as we continue to exemplify wonderful things for our listeners, we're making great strides this season, continuing to do a lineup of all new dynamic shows, interviews, guests. We've already teased on a few shows that we're coming up on 100 episodes.
Woohoo!
We're really excited about that. We've got over 21,000 plays and downloads.
Yes.
And we're really lucky to be able to continue to do this work thanks to this support of our founding sponsor, CET and BioSTL.
Yes.
So if you haven't already checked out our website and theirs, and if you're not already registered for the Vision Conference in October, or if you haven't put in your application for the Square One program, if you're just not keeping track of Cheryl and all the many places she's speaking, you guys just got mentioned in your 10th publication celebrating all the work that the BioSTL, Bioscience, and Entrepreneurship Inclusion Initiative does, correct?
Absolutely. We were highlighted by the Institute of Public Policy for Women's Research.
So, don't take our word for it. There's all these other folks out there.
Yes.
And Cheryl's even going to New Orleans, right?
I told you, going to get some beignets.
Excellent. She promised to bring me back some food. So I don't want to be the one sitting next to you on the plane. You could be like, this is for Christy. That's why I smell like crawfish. I smell like crawfish and beignets.
That's a great mix.
I'm just saying. I like to cover the entire spectrum. But the good news is that you're going there to talk about all the work that you're doing, the example that you have set, which ties into our theme of exemplification.
They want to establish what we're doing here down in their innovation district, which is really cool.
And the podcast is a huge part of that because we want to elevate and celebrate the stories that don't often get told, make sure that we're connecting people to the resources they need, and inspire you to be entrepreneurial wherever you are. So share the podcast with your friends and tell them they can find us wherever they find their favorite podcast.
Yes.
So who are we talking to today?
Well, I always start off with some research here.
I know,
now.
You're good.
So the Harvard Business Review addressed specific myths about what customers really want. One of those myths is that most consumers want to have relationships with your brand.
They don't.
Really? I want to have a relationship with people's brands.
Depends on the brand. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it depends on the relationship. Only 23% of the consumers in their study said they have a relationship with the brand. Those who didn't have relationships explained with comments like, it's just a brand, not a member of my family. Maybe they feel that way because brands haven't been personal, like family. Well, some family you don't want to have a relationship with anyway. But anyway, that's a whole different topic, right?
Yes, again, brands, relationships, so many intersections.
So today we will hear from a marketing and advertising agency whose mantra is to make brands more human. In fact, they don't refer to themselves as an ad agency, which I think is very cool. They are a human business consultancy. Bigwidesky is on a mission to inspire leaders to find solutions that will make their businesses less fragile in the face of change. And this is what we really want to concentrate on. Their lead futurist, which I think is such a cool title, and strategist, Jermey Nulik, will join us when we come back. So stay listening.
BioSTL is a proud founding sponsor of this Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast, and we want you to know all about the great things they are up to. BioSTL Fundamentals is an entrepreneur development program targeted to founders wishing to start a company in the bioscience space, including therapeutic products, diagnostic products, medical devices, animal and crop agriculture products, and research tools. Participants earn resources by achieving specific coaching goals. You can learn more about BioSTL Fundamentals by visiting biostl.org. And for your renewed and continuing support, BioSTL, we say thank you.
I'm Jermey Nulik with Bigwidesky. What entrepreneurially thinking means to me is the ability to see first what is possible and really explore it deeply before settling on what kind of preferred future I really want to create. And the kind of visionaries who can do that are just so encouraging and inspiring to people because they can be so much more inclusive of the kinds of visions that maybe they wouldn't first consider, but they're willing to take a look at the possibility space before settling upon what they prefer.
So Jermey Nulik is joining us today. In fact, his title is Evangelist Prime and Futurist.
Woohoo! What the heck? Oh,
well, we're going to ask him. We're going to ask what
about that.
And so while all this unfolds, on the backdrop of the agency, on the backdrop of Bigwidesky, like you said, we're going to spend just a little bit of time making sure people know what that is, but a lot of time explaining what it means to be an evangelist, prime, and a futurist. So, Jeremy, thank you for joining us. Yes. And please explain yourself.
I was going to say, explain it, Lucy.
Explain
Where would you like me to begin? Explain myself? Existential question. So explain the Evangelist Prime thing?
Yeah, what's that?
Do you want the cool story or the real story?
Both,
right. Start with the cool one, then we'll backtrack.
Okay.
I'm thinking it's like Optimus Prime, which is like a Transformer, and that it begins and ends my Transformer knowledge.
It is a proud lineage.
Okay.
The Primes.
Excellent.
Right. Well, the cool story is that it's just nerdy enough for me.
Okay.
I think that we were looking for, when I joined the company full time, because I'd been, working with Elliot. I actually did a story on Elliot Frick, the founder of Bigwidesky, 8 years ago, which is how I met him.
Wow.
And ever since then, we've been working together on different projects, but I had never worked at Bigwidesky.
So what were you doing? Okay, because I always like the backstory.
So now we got to sidebar the cool story thing.
Put that on.
Go.
How did Jeremy get into this space? I mean, are you from St. Louis, Jeremy?
I'm not from St. Louis. I can't answer the high school question. I just make up a high school.
None of us.
Oh, this is so cool.
There's no
all
high
three
school.
Sagittarius, all three not from
That's right.
Yes.
St. Louis.
So this is going to be a loud, interesting conversation, everybody.
We're going to avoid the Midwest nice. So I mean, I got my start in
Where are you
public
from?
relations. I'm from southern Kansas. I grew up.
Toto and
right. I dodged tornadoes.
Dorothy.
Narrowly escaped.
Right.
Don't make Midwest references.
Right.
I was like, Toto. What's the girl's name? Dorothy. Right. Southern Kansas.
Right. Grew up in agricultural sort of communities. Most of my folks are tied to farming, ranching, that sort of thing. My father was a salesperson for a feed company that actually is based in St. Louis. We've actually moved around a bunch of times. I moved 7 times growing up, different rural communities.
Okay.
He sold feed to ranchers. So grew up in a lot of rural communities, ended up going to school in Chicago area in Naperville. North Central College is a small school, and a lot of people have never heard of it, or they make references to Emily Dickinson College or something, sort of thing. So
I grew up in Chicago, so Naperville I'm quite familiar
know where
with.
that is.
Yeah.
Right, and so I was there for a while, and then I got a gig at an ad agency in St. Louis after I graduated, and I was not qualified at all for it, but I got a copywriting gig, and that's what brought me here.
Okay.
So
really?
Yeah. Yeah, and then, I have a background also in journalism, so I moved from that into the journalism side, worked for Small Business Monthly, and then as a freelance journalist, different business publications, the Business Journal. I've written for Feast and a few other local. Writing about food's a lot more fun.
And we like to hear and eat food.
That's
right. We already had the mixture of beignets and crawfish.
Yes.
And gumbo.
Yes.
So bringing it full circle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So I actually did it. I found Elliot 8 years ago-ish. I was at an event, and he was just so transparent with me about mistakes he'd made as a business owner and other sorts of decisions he'd made that he thought on paper sounded really good. And he even knowing I was in journalism, he was still very extremely honest with me, which in journalism is harder to find.
Yeah.
And so I was like, do you mind if I do a story on that? And he was like,
wow.
Oh, sure. So I did a story on this guy who almost killed his company by the decisions he made.
Wow.
That seemed really good on paper, but then...
But that's a good learn. I mean, that's what we try to uncover with folks, the truth about starting your company. Everybody thinks, I can do it in a dorm room and it just starts and I'll be the next Mark Zuckerberg, Right,
or that decisions are easy to make and the path forward is clear and the opportunities present themselves. But we know from experience that that's not the case.
Right. And I think that the thing that really compelled me about Elliot, and it does tie to this Evangelist Prime Futurist thing, is that he had an ability to synthesize different kinds of knowledge and different groups of theories in such a way that he could create a kind of, posture, a compelling sort of change that is possible for people, and maybe something that could address challenges on a much more fundamental level than what normally is understood as like quote unquote marketing advertising, right? Mm-hmm. So most of the time when you're working on someone with their communications kind of problem, you're generally trying to help them to look or sound smarter or better or something.
Right.
And without first addressing like, well, how did we get here? And what do we think is possible in the future? And what kind of humans are at this place that could face that kind of vision together? What are they capable of?
That's really cool.
Like those kinds of, and so he had ways in which he could address those kinds of problems by synthesizing all kinds of different knowledge, one of which being futures studies or design futures.
So he's not just, or Big White Sky was not just about, because marketing is about perception, right?
Sure.
So he wasn't just about changing perception. He was about changing the foundational vision of the organization so that it fits with what that vision or future vision looks like, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Because most companies don't do that from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, and certainly not as a pitch to Big White Sky at all, but like that's part of the whole be human thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times you can read that and think, oh, be nice, and it's more so if we
be
could
best,
right? If we could create systems that feel and act and behave more like a human system and less like a machine, then we could be able to face problems that maybe are unexpected or maybe things that we didn't think were possible.
Because that's human. That's the environments in which we live, right?
Amen.
Unexpected crap happens.
Right. The unexpected does happen. Right.
So going back to the Evangelist Prime and Futurist, is that how your title came to be? Because that's what you focus on with companies, or?
I mean, the Evangelist Prime was my first title at Big White Sky, and it came about because we honestly didn't know what to tell me. That's the real what to tell people. I think that trying to help folks to get to the deepest, if they're in an organization or if they're in a community of people, trying to get to the deepest sort of challenge, the node on the tree of all of those sorts of challenges you have to address the deepest one. It's hard to go in there with a title that explains like that's kind of investigation or that's what we'll be doing. But the shorthand is essentially I'm just trying to, I guess, in a way of being an evangelist, you're spreading the word about a certain kind of thinking, cool. And so that you can, in fact, face change by creating systems that are more human, by creating systems that recapitulate the things that we understand about humans. And that people can face challenges together, and that we have an idea of the possibility of the future. So those kinds of systems are things that are possible.
And what does it mean to be a futurist? I mean, I think that sometimes we ascribe that to the,
soothsayer
folks who, that's somebody who's deeply entrenched in some area of technology or other aspects of things. It's not a title you hear often, right? And not necessarily a skill set or there's no degree program that I'm aware of.
Harry Potter.
But where's that? I mean, I see the alignment between helping people think in terms of building systems that are more human, but how does that actually? What allows you to adopt that futurist role?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's valid. I think you're right. It's there are a lot of ways that you could mistake futurist as a title, and I think that one of them is like the soothsayer thing, like Rasputin, right? Like or something like you're gonna predict what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Another is, like you said, a lot of folks think that futures means that you think about technology, or that you're just, you have some kind of domain of knowledge. Future studies, in general, is really about making more transparent or being able to articulate alternative possible sorts of futures in any kind of given situation. It's about really getting to know the future. We have a lot of structures.
How do you do that?
Right.
How do you get to know the future? I watched the Jetsons, and that was futuristic back. And look at all the stuff that came from the Jetsons. That's real
and that hasn't
now.
Yet materialized from the Jetsons.
Right. Stuff that actually is working.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, pretty soon, I think that isn't there a robot called Rosie now that's going to like greet people?
I'm sure there is.
I can't remember which company's done it now, but almost literally they've made it, right? I think that the futures studies is a way that you can look at change. It's just a way to get to know how things change or what is possible about change. And it's less useful in predicting future. It's more useful in saying, here are the kinds of futures we could find ourselves in, and what would be the implications of those kinds of futures. Who would we be in these futures, and how would we need to respond? And if you can then build your plan, if you're going out into the world, let's say you're starting a thing, or maybe you're inside of a company and you want to start a new thing, then you can begin saying, like, what if those are the kinds of implications that are out there that are possible, then how can we build a plan or systems that can be responsive should one of those seemingly unlikely things occur? And if you can create those kinds of plans, then you could be responsive to any number of changes. And so getting to know the future in a lot of ways is the same as getting to know the past. We have a lot of systems for how we get to know the past. And we've built a lot of systems for getting to know the past. It has this structure. It feels like there's something there.
So when you say systems like being able to reflect and analyze and literally and figuratively do archaeology, these are the ways we get to know the past.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. And so strategic foresight, which is the discipline that to your point about degree programs, there are actually degree programs in strategic foresight. You can learn how to be a futurist. And yeah. So I went to University of Houston to study strategic foresight. And so what they have is they provide for you a framework on here's how you map a system, and here are stages by which you can then find what are the signals that are present in a current state that could become something in the future. And if I were to combine some of those together, then here are kinds of the images of the future that could be really compelling or interesting. And that we can then begin to analyze them and say, well, what kinds of futures would we really prefer?
See, that's really interesting because you're from Big Wide Sky, they're looking at it from a marketing perspective. How do you take what you're doing and be able to predictively have some type of, options for getting to that customer or understanding who that customer might be? It could change, right? But for entrepreneurs or people looking for maybe new businesses, this is a great opportunity to explore, what is the market looking like? How are things changing in the market? How do I take advantage of market opportunities, or how do I protect myself from downturns in the market if there's something coming up? So really understanding market trends and how they affect individuals. Is that something?
Yeah, it is. Innovation strategy is really a bet on the future. You're making a bet on the future. A lot of times when you talk to folks who are trying their best to figure out what trends are there, they do a good job at and mashing up data, big data, right? That's going to help me to know and predict what will happen. And so if you rely solely on that, the issue that you run into is that you essentially then have said that the past is going to be the best kind of predictor of the future. And what has been discovered over and over again is that that's absolutely untrue.
Right.
And that over any given period of time, unlikely things are actually highly likely to happen.
Right.
And so, a single unlikely thing is highly likely.
Like the black swan.
Right, exactly. Black swan events will happen, and any number of things occur that you just couldn't necessarily predict solely out of data. And so what it's saying is that the human beings in the system that are involved in the system of creating that innovation strategy hold inside of them notions about the future. They have preconceived notions about what it likely could be. And they also have some other notions on like, here's some quiet things we're seeing, but we're not really sure what they mean yet. And if you can find a way in which you can build images from the future based on those, and then you have a kind of visceral reaction to those images, you can create an innovation strategy that can be much more flexible and can be responsive.
This is so cool. I'm really, this is very cool on how you look at future. And maybe when we come back, I'm really interested in learning, how do companies, when you engage them in this conversation, their feedback? Because I came out of corporate and I can see two reactions. One would be, what the hell are you talking about? I just asked you to come in here and do some branding. Or they look at you to say, maybe you can help us move, directionally towards where the market is going and where our customers are going. So
when we come back.
CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, is a proud founding sponsor of this Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. We want you to know all about the great things they are up to. Square One offers 2 training options. Square One Ignite, a 4-week program created to help founders quick start their business model validation process. Or Square One Bootcamp, an in-depth 10-week, 50-hour program that combines formal instruction with hands-on learning, networking, and mentoring. To learn more about Square One Bootcamp or Square One Ignite, visit CETSTL.com. And for your renewed and continuing support, CET, we say thank you.
I'm John Harden. I'm the Executive Director of MedLaunch at St. Louis University. To me, entrepreneurially thinking means being aggressive, being innovative, and absolutely willing to think out of the box.
So picking up on Cheryl's question, how do most people react? Like she said, they come in expecting, most customers come in expecting you to do what they already have decided they need done, right?
Right.
And there's always that conversation of, well, what you actually need is blank. And then there's this, and we're going to adopt this different way of thinking in this process. It's also going to help us pick up on what the possible futures might look like. So
do you get that blank stare?
Well, I mean, I, along with a lot of my cohorts at Bigwidesky, we are like an aisle of misfit toys, so we're kind of used to being stared at that way.
Awesome.
I don't think it really bothers anyone.
Doesn't intimidate you.
So I think, though, it's a lot like, my friends who are in therapy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, who are therapists, I should say. All of us should be in therapy.
That might be in therapy.
That's a good distinction.
I have a friend who's a therapist for therapists. Oh. And
that's a whole nother...
It's like
who does he go to?
That's a meta thing.
Right? Who's the B-Watch watcher?
Right.
So the, but and he'll often say it this way, and I think it's true of a lot of folks, right? You have the presenting problem, and then you have the real problem. Mm-hmm. And so when often we're called in, it's usually because there's some form of a misalignment or an aspiration that's bigger than what the current state would suggest could be possible, which generally is an innovation or entrepreneurially sort of minded thing, which, by the way, guys, entrepreneurially minded is one of the hardest, like entrepreneurially thinking. Anyway,
it is. It's hard. It's hard. It is. But you know what? Eventually, everyone will say it with
I'm getting in there.
Ease.
I'm trying.
Yes.
Red leather, yellow leather. So that's the kind of, there is the underlying sort of form to the issue. And so often what we'll do is introduce sorts of practices or exercises folks can do. And usually that will help to uncover what it is that's actually at the root of the issue. Mm-hmm. And ultimately the goal is for folks to have a level of new mindset or self-awareness about what it is that's really going on. So we have, and a lot of those are based on strategic foresight theories. So we've gathered folks who are facing some kind of a challenge together. Like even if it's something that is seemingly simple as how do we best articulate a particular brand, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Or if it's we want to build a new business section because we think that there's a market out there for this thing that we do, but we want to build a new thing just specifically on this. And let's explore that. Well, how do we explore that together, right? And what often happens, and you guys have probably been a part of a lot of these sorts of efforts, knowing your guys' backgrounds and how powerful you guys have had an impact. You guys are used to like dealing with groups that are like, cool, we'll go do this change together. And then in the middle of the build phase of that thing, suddenly there's either passive-aggressive or aggressive-aggressive attempts to tear down what it is you thought we all agreed on. And it's like, I thought we all had agreed. The same idea. Like we said the same words, right?
Right.
Like you were there, you know. And so what often
their alter ego showed up. They really didn't agree, but they thought they agreed, right?
Yeah. Or people. There is sometimes in those settings
they aspire to agreement,
right?
Sure. Or there is sometimes a political inscription, like small p political inscription that you're basically saying I will get along and go along.
Right.
And so you
until
have people
it becomes real.
resentfully complying to what you say until,
People don't like change anyway.
Sure.
Many people do not like change at all.
Hilarious, right? Because like, you know, they will outwardly say this and then face change all the time and be totally okay with it without calling it change.
Right.
And so these are human beings, right? And so the idea is that we can gather those kinds of stakeholders in a challenge together. And we can say, how are you really seeing the futures? What kinds of possibilities really do exist? And if I could build you images from that future, very literal ones, and I could tell you this is what it would look like, what kind of person would you be in those futures? What would happen then? How would you respond to this kind of future? We've even had them complain we have an exercise in which you complain for 90 minutes. It's called an evaporation. So all the stakeholders get together and they complain for 90 minutes about how to face attempts previously to face this challenge, ways in which you've tried to face the challenge maybe in another setting, and they complain. And
for 90 minutes, you give them 90 minutes.
There's 3 rules. There's one complaint at a time. There are no complaining about complaints, so you can't tell someone their complaint's wrong. And you go for quantity. And the reason for that rule is that, hey, if you have a slight notion that something's a complaint, it is. Like, go ahead and get that out. So what you do is you then have, like, emotional data, right? And if you can look at it that way, then you can say, these are the notions that people have, and you can begin to see themes. And themes will arise in challenge areas, and you can say, I see. So of the possible futures, of the possible ways that you could address this challenge together, here are the places you don't want to go, because behind every complaint is actually a conviction. The reason that you have complaint language is because something inside of you is offended in some way. And so if I can take this to you and I can say, here are the futures where we won't go. We won't go to these places because you said that's important to you. They're not my principles. They're your principles. Right. And so you can begin to then expose people to the idea that there's possibility space, and you sound less weird when you start talking about it. So this is my sneaky way into talking to people about the future, right? Because we have good information from the past. You have notions about the past that keep you that have given you the beliefs you have right now, the ideology you hold, or whatever it may be. And that's useful stuff, but you can put it to better use if you can project then principles into the future. So
if I want to practice this, we've talked a lot with folks one-on-one on the podcast and other parts of our life about the entrepreneurial mindset and how do you actually practice being able to question the default and have a bias towards action and experiment and all the things that we see as part and parcel as someone who has a growth mindset and is open to new opportunities, can put themselves in that frame of mind. If I want to put myself in the frame of mind of being more attuned to strategic foresight, how do I do that?
That's a good question. So you're right. Like and that's a good point, especially about entrepreneurially minded folks. People who already have an attenuation to that mindset. I think, what you'll see is they tend to have preconceived notions about what ought be. And they become really passionate about that particular idea. And then it's very difficult to emancipate yourself from that particular idea, to your point. And they tend to be action-oriented. And there's really good value in that. Absolutely. And you wouldn't want to necessarily change that. And the only encouragement I would say is you can always pick up that mindset again. So you don't have to sacrifice it completely or get rid of it, because that's what makes entrepreneurially minded people great, is that mindset. But for a period of time, there's a framework that was introduced by a guy named Jim Dater, who is said to be, I believe, the godfather of futures thinking. I could be making that up. But he's been studying.
Sounds good. Sounds credible.
I think he would dig it. I mean, he's who
doesn't want to be a godfather of some sort?
It would be pretty cool.
Godfather's soul, that's already taken.
Yeah. So of futurists.
So futures is
is open.
Obviously.
That's cool.
So he is at the University of Hawaii, and he's been studying the way that people think about the future for about 40 years or so. And he said that there's generally 4 ways that people typically, when you ask them to create images from the future, there's 4 ways people typically will make those images, or will create them. So he made them into these kind of backdrops. The first one, he said, is called continuation, and that's a vision in which the things that are trending right now continue to grow. Or they're generally also characterized as best possible outcomes. So it's like, if population's growing, population continues to grow. If this kind of technology is advancing, this kind of technology continues to advance. It's if you were to look at it on a graph, it would have like an exponential sort of curve, right? It's continuation vision. So those kinds of visions of the future. Those people tend to be really optimistic when they have those kinds. So entrepreneurially minded people tend to have this kind of vision of the future. The next vision of the future he characterizes is called collapse. And it doesn't really pull any punches with the name, right? So collapse visions happen because the things that you thought were going to grow and the systems you thought were going to help you in the future have gone away. Yeah, right? It's like Mad Max sort of scenarios.
I was going to say it's Walking Dead,
right? Yeah, like extreme collapse scenarios. We
all have our ways of coping with the present. By
you wake up in a Franz Kafka novel. Yeah. So it's just everything is gone, right? So the third way in which people typically see the future, he calls discipline. Disciplined futures happen because you're kind of cynical and you know that things can't get better, but you sure don't want things to get worse. So you create a whole bunch of systems, processes, and you develop all kinds of ways in which things won't get worse. A lot of this is characterized by like environmentalist sort of groups are this way, right? Like, hey, we just want to conserve the stuff we have.
Right.
So we've got our survivalists, our environmentalists.
Right. Right, exactly.
Our optimists, and then where's our fourth take us?
The fourth one is called transformation visions. Transformation visions are that the basis for reality is completely shifted. Something has happened that has made it so that the challenge you were first facing or the way you characterize it is obviated. It's gone. So something's happened either inbound or outbound that you've created that has shifted the future. So the point with this framework is that if you are facing a change or you're trying to characterize your idea, if you're inside an organization or you're in a community of people and you want to get them encouraged to think differently, what you can do is actually you can introduce this framework. Like, hey guys, if we were to create this thing, whatever it is, what would be the best possible outcome? The continuation vision. What could be the worst possible outcome? The collapse vision. What would a disciplined future look like? Like, what kind of systems would we create to keep things from getting worse? And what's potentially transformative about what it is we're talking about?
So how difficult is it for people to get to that transformative? Because that is really, it's got to be challenging.
It's not what most people are. Yes. Like the first 3, we can all name people who exemplify.
Right.
That's the word.
That is our word of the day, or at least for this podcast. But the transformative is more exceptional.
Yes, because you've got to think outside of the norm, right? Think outside
beyond what's even exists.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the thing that's wonderful is
George Jetson, she says.
Right. Well, I think that what's interesting is if you do go through the framework as such, so if you start with continuation, you go to collapse, you go to discipline, by the time you get to transformation, your mind will start to be expanded enough that you can begin to toy with those kinds of ideas. This is especially fun if you have a preconceived notion on what you really want. So especially...
Most people do.
Exactly. Yes. Most of us carry those, right? And it's very hard to emancipate yourself from that.
Right.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's like, especially if you think that something will lead to collapse, this is an especially fun one to do. Because then you have to say, like, well, what could be the best outcome?
Right.
And then what could be... If we were going to take a disciplined approach and really make it so things couldn't get worse, now I have to think of what kind of things would I put in place so that I could make it so things wouldn't happen. By the time your mind is expanded that far, the aperture actually is kind of ready for something else. But to your point, a lot of times what will happen is if you're doing this group, like a group of sort of business-minded folk, they will typically do like a UFO landing sort of thing for their transformative, trying to be cute. And what's really fun, though, is that they will dial it back and eventually be able to tell you, like, actually what could happen is these people we thought were... we did this with a group of agricultural executives, and they suddenly were able to get to a transformative vision of the future based on decisions they could make in present day, wherein activists who maybe oppose them could actually be on their side. And it could be that they could enfranchise them as part of a solution set, given that they were able to see that actually there's common ground on this basis. which is a conclusion that doesn't seem rational, but it is possible, right? Which is what futures exploration is supposed to be, is what is possible.
Right.
This is really exciting. I think, as folks who like to think about how we think.
Right.
Yeah, it is.
This is a
think
really
differently,
and to push yourself to think differently. So you talked about two things in this process that before our time together wraps up, which will rather shortly here, I hope we have enough time to explore just briefly, is this idea of creating concrete images and picking up on signals. So I know. Quickly.
Okay. Well, so if you go to the Institute for the Future's website, it's probably the fastest way for me to talk about it. So because they have on their website examples of when they've done futures work with groups of people to get them to think differently. Now, they've gone to places like South by Southwest, EDU, so you have groups of people who care about education, and they've created images from possible futures, and they will even create artifacts from the future. So we travel to the future, we combine
So it's future archaeology.
It's nice work. Jade is going to just love you so much.
Jade really was happy with the archaeology.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll sometimes even use the term to that point, like scaffolding from the future. So they'll tell you here are some handholds or things to take a look at on what could be, and they will present it to people in those kinds of ways. Now, the reason for that, instead of just saying here's what could be possible, is people have visceral reactions that aren't completely rational when they are interpreting videos, images, elements from a future. If you're immersed inside of something, you think on a different basis than normally, right? Than your rational mind would allow. And so that kind of information and those kinds of implications are really important, because it turns out that that's probably the way most people make decisions anyway. We tell ourselves that we're going to be logic-based in our decision-making,
and then
but generally we're not.
Exactly.
Right? We all know this, right?
So finding ways to make this possible future real in tangible ways that I can touch and see and interact with in some way
has a real effect. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, there's even been studies done on your, if you can study the kinds of images people make of the future, you can very well predict kind of where that kind of culture or group is headed.
I was going to say, with the whole, now people using 3D environments and having that visual impression, I'm sure it's got to stimulate, especially brain waves. And I'm science. Okay. So
no, I mean, there's all sorts of things to stimulate. Yeah. Absolutely.
And especially when you're talking to hardwired, geared people who are not so much future focused. They're like, okay, I see that. Yeah. How am I going to transform this Ritz bag into something else? But I think what you're talking about, visually stimulating individuals, can probably increase the opportunity.
So the ways I can tomorrow, other than also going to all these references that you've mentioned, right? But as I can explore how I vision the future in the 4 ways that you've explained to us, I can actually find ways to create imagery around what that possible future might look like. Yeah. And then this idea that there are signals I could be listening or watching for, is that also part of, like when we say questioning the default or looking for opportunities within the entrepreneur's cognitive framework, it sounds like that's also something I can tune myself into from a futurist mindset.
Yeah. I mean, futurists, the terms they'll use are things like trends and signals, right? So a trend would be something that already has momentum and is understood, right? So AI, right? And entrepreneur groups, it seems like here's a new thing.
Is artificial intelligence for our listeners.
So artificial intelligence, right? So if I take this, I sprinkle artificial intelligence on it, it's a future thing, right? Because so it's actually a trend. It's a thing that people understand to a degree. At least they have some notion about it.
Right.
Signals tend to be the kinds of notions, ideas. They can be even assumptions that aren't yet an overarching sort of trend, but if they were to gain momentum, could actually impact the future greatly. And so, those are the quiet sort of notions that exist inside of groups of people usually, that they don't often have a way to talk about. And there's usually notions about this, especially in leadership groups, about I have a notion or an instinct about something, but it's even hard to characterize.
Yeah.
And so there's a reason that you're responding to culture in that way. And if you can explore those kinds of, opportunities for yourself, then, or those kinds of notions deeper, then what you can do is create more compelling kinds of visions of the future.
Now, this is deep.
It is deep.
Deep.
So, Jeremy, you've given us a lot of great things to think about, right? This is I could spend I'm looking at Cheryl, and I could say we could spend another half day, week, whatever, talking about this, right? And wrapping our minds around these different frameworks and the language of futurism. Could you remind our listeners again where they can look? You mentioned Jim at the University of Hawaii. You mentioned a couple other websites. Could you mention those, and then also how they would find you locally if they want to continue the conversation?
Oh, sure. Yeah. If you go, it's iftf.org is the Institute for the Future. Bigwidesky.com is Bigwidesky, obviously. There's also the More Human podcast that I'll
Which
plug.
Is brand new, correct?
Right, exactly. We launched just couple weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I just took a nod from you guys.
Awesome. We're happy to inspire.
You inspire greatly, of course. And the Futurist, is that what you're asking for? Jim Dator from the University of Hawaii, yes. Dator. If you find an old guy with like a page boy looking haircut, that's Jim Dator.
Ooh, that's a look.
It is a look.
Especially for a futurist.
You're in Hawaii, you're a futurist. Okay. You can wear whatever hair you want to wear.
I guess you could. Okay. Well, to say that it's been a pleasure is an understatement. So thank you for really opening up a whole new way of thinking for us. And we've already said there's definitely a part 2 in our future. Absolutely. I think looking at how this thinking has been applied locally, but also, some other real world applications to this, because that always helps make the learning more real for everybody.
I'm honored to be on. You guys are amazing. You guys have powerhouse people on your show. Almost 100 episodes now.
Almost 100 episodes.
I mean, you guys are killing it, and I would be always honored to come play again. So
great.
I appreciate
you. Gotta come
Thank
play
you
the
so
sandbox.
much.
Yes. Thank you. Have a good day.
Changing the way you view new ventures. Igniting your thinking about entrepreneurship. It's Entrepreneurially Thinking. Get connected and discover more. Visit our website for show notes, resources, information about our guests, upcoming events, and of course, all your favorite episodes. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them for us in the comment sections, and be sure to leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes. The best way to show love is to share. Let everybody know that you're thinking entrepreneurially. So visit our website, entrepreneurially-thinking.com. #ETHINKSTL. Entrepreneurially Thinking is another positive production of Rare Gem Productions. Thanks for listening.